So I would like to thank you for attending this evening's event. I am incredibly proud to bring together an event that is the first of its kind for Women in Digital Switzerland, and one of the first events we have taking place on the topic of neurodiversity in this country. Before we start, I'd like to make just a few points. So please make sure that your microphone is muted, as there are quite a few of you joining us. I have enabled closed captions for those who prefer and require them. This event is being recorded. So again, if you are uncomfortable having any of you on camera, please make sure your camera is disabled. If we experience any kind of lag, I may ask the audience to turn off their camera, but otherwise have it on or off as you prefer. The chat is open for commentary and discussion throughout this event. So I'd like to thank our volunteers, Jana and Amelia, for moderating the chat this evening. Please ask questions wherever you like. Jana and Amelia will be collecting them to answer at the end of the panel discussion. We will not stop the event for questions, but if there's any terms that are confusing to people, as the moderator, I will endeavour to clarify those and find a definition that people can understand them with. So finally, the panel of discussion is divided into two parts. We'll have a short break in between them of around 5 to 10 minutes. You are free to take a pause at any time you wish. So you can turn off your camera, you can go out the room, just make sure that you are on mute. So Women in Digital Switzerland is an organisation that focuses on gender equality and empowerment for digital women in the workplace. However, in order to achieve our goals for every woman, we must look to deliver on intersectionality, which is one of the reasons why we're hosting this event. You may attend this event knowing nothing at all about neurodiversity. You might only know about stereotypes of neurodivergence, such as a hyperactive young boy with ADHD, or maybe you know a lot because you have neurodivergent loved ones and you might even be neurodivergent yourself. This evening, we will focus on this topic because we passionately believe that neurodivergent talent in Switzerland is not being utilised. And beyond that, by potentially excluding neurodivergent people from the workplace, we are doing untold damage. We wish to facilitate a discussion that informs and empowers in order to create change for ourselves and also within our organisations. This evening, we will meet 4 women who all bring different perspectives on neurodiversity, from the medical perspective to lived experience to what it's like to be a manager of and recruit neurodivergent people. We will discover why neurodiversity is a strength and an asset in our communities and companies, and how we can set up the best environments for neurodivergent people to thrive. I want to add as a disclaimer that when you talk to one neurodivergent person, you only are talking to one neurodivergent person. So while the stories and perspectives you will hear tonight are incredibly enlightening and can give us so much insight, we can never represent the situation of absolutely everyone who's neurodivergent. So speaking and learning from a diverse community of people is the best way to do that. So firstly, I'm going to give a very short presentation to introduce Women in Digital Switzerland. So yes, we have the banner of our event here, and we do many different events across Switzerland and also online. So our community is made up of around 10,000 people. This is across our website and our social media channels. We've hosted to this date over 300 events in Switzerland, both online and offline, in 8 cities. So we are active with chapters in Basel, Geneva, Lausanne, St. Gallen, Lugano, Bern, and Zug. And as I said, we do online events such as this one. So we are a association in Switzerland. That means we are a not-for-profit organization. Therefore, we are funded by our membership fees and donations only. So I wanted to talk quickly about our membership. We have for 20 francs per year, which is around the price of 2 pumpkin spice lattes, a digital community that you can access. We have forums and groups where people can discuss in a safe space online. We also offer particular discounts to our supporter members. And as well, we offer exclusive events for these supporters. You can also get other exclusive benefits, such as joining our mentorship program and accessing other exclusive offers and many more things that our membership team comes up with. I also wanted to quickly thank those who've made a donation this evening. As I said, we're completely funded by membership fees and donations only. That enables us to keep going and running these type of events, and also contributing to our efforts to support women facing unemployment and underemployment in this country with initiatives such as the Work in Tech program, where we have distributed over 100 licenses for Google Coursera courses to people facing these challenges in the region of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So these donations keep us going. I'd like to say thank you very much. If you haven't already donated and you'd like to, you can use the QR code, and Emilia and Jan will pop the link in the chat as well. So I am going to do a very quick icebreaker. So I'd just like you to put in the chat if you were familiar with the term neurodivergent before you signed up to this event. It's a busy chat. I'm having a long way to scroll down. Okay, so some are saying just a little, some are saying yes, not so much. So some are saying that they're neurodivergent themselves. You're definitely in good company here. I have no's as well. So a bit of a mix of awareness here. So for anyone who is not aware, the term neurodiversity is used to describe the wide range of neurological functioning within the human race. So this could include people who are more on the quote typical side of neurological functioning, down to those who differ slightly. So the word neurodivergent is a term that's used to describe those who kind of differ from this typical. Again, I use this in quotes a little bit because what is typical is quite up for debate. So a lot of people who identify as neurodivergent are people who have ADHD, autism, things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. So they are learning differences that affect things like motor coordination, reading, working memory. And so we also have people who have Tourette's, bipolar, people who are considered hypertensial, people who have things like OCD and mental health conditions, as well as things like intellectual disability. So it's a big umbrella. And by any means, I have not mentioned absolutely everybody, but it's worth researching the neurodivergent umbrella if you have time. So now that I have all of that out the way, I would like to introduce our panel. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Fry, who is a Swiss recognized psychotherapist and an American licensed clinical psychologist at her practice See Together, which she co-founded. See Together focuses on bringing support to English speakers through community building and group events. She is passionate about working with marginalized people, including neuroatypicals and the international population in Switzerland. Then I would like to introduce Valentina Coco. She is a team culture and engagement expert and coach. Additionally, she wrote the book, What Power Do I Have? Valentina has worked in areas from corporate finance to supply chain, all the way to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she's worked both in corporate roles and been self-employed. She now works in organizational change and culture. Diagnosed as neurodivergent in her late 30s after a lifetime of feeling like she never fit anywhere, which I think many of us can relate to. She now openly talks about everything and anything in the hope of breaking taboos. Thirdly, I would like to introduce Sarah Collins-Kaufman, a program manager who is a passionate advocate for neurodiversity and mental health in the workplace. Her advocacy actually began when she was at university, when she worked with a mental health organization, sharing her experiences and by doing so, reducing stigma. She definitely has not stopped there. And while she was working in the field of foreign relations, she managed a multiple embassy supporter campaign to provide essential English-speaking mental health resources for the first time ever in Switzerland. So this is an absolutely huge achievement, and we're really grateful, Sarah, for this initiative. And last, but by no means least, I introduced Victoria Granova. She is an international journalist, marketing and communications specialist, and an entrepreneur. Over the past 7 years, she has navigated diverse sectors from the United Nations to education and financial services. She has enriched their brand strategy and global marketing operations. Recently, she's championed neurodiversity with her Nest Voices newsletter, and she's in the process of establishing the Association for Neurodiversity in Switzerland. And so now I will just very quickly introduce myself. So I'm Rachel Camp. I am an independent UX designer specializing in visual design. And I'm also the VP of UX brand and project implementation here at Women in Digital Switzerland. I am what I call multiply neurodivergent. And I organize today's event because I believe that we can do more to create a more neuro-inclusive society. I also want to give a quick shout out to Jana Laghart and Amelia Mota, who are moderating the chat this evening and have been helping behind the scenes to create content and manage registrations for this event. Also, a huge thank you to Andrea Rubrick, our president, and the entire WDS team for their support. So we will now kick off the panel discussion. So to start our discussion, I want to talk a little about how neurodiversity touches each of us. So my very first question to our panel is, what are the positives of being neurodivergent or working with neurodivergent people? You can ask that as you see fit. I will go in the order that I see on my screen. So as Victoria is to the right of me, I will ask Victoria to answer first and then call on Valentina.
Thank you, Rachel. When I was younger, I used to send the message to the universe asking, why can't I be normal? Whatever it means to be normal. And when I got my diagnosis when I was 23, I started to see my ADHD, my neurodivergent, as a superpower. Now, to be honest, I don't see it as positive or negative. It's just the core part of who I am. And what I value personally, I value my sensitivity. I value my drive for justice, creativity, and resilience. And why I enjoy working with neurodivergent people, because they are often very hardworking, because we're used to prove to everyone that we can do it. We are resilient, and also it's very easy to bond to other neurodivergent people because these relationships, they often bypass typical social cues and unspoken rules, and it's very easy to build deep relationship with the other neurodivergent people.
I mean, I think I empathize with why me. And I have to say, I have not yet found a superpower or a positive side, or a very positive side, let's say, to having OCD. Most of the time is extremely disruptive, to be fair. There are some positive things which, who knows if it's my OCD or just my way of being organized. Nevertheless, what I love about working with people which are neurodivergent, when we can be ourselves at work, I should say, is that we all bring a complete different view. We don't have to force ourselves to be out of the box. because we are out of the box and we don't have to force the thinking. And it's just very complementary, and we can come up with idea or say things or bring perspective to problem resolution or whatever it is, or even team bonding that were not thought before. That only happens though when we can actually be ourselves. If we are busy masking, as in covering and pretending to be typical and normal, then that doesn't happen. So that's what I would like to, that's my point of view.
Hi, everyone. I very much relate to Valentina's kind of struggle about finding a positivity. Being bipolar, I've had very much a lifelong kind of struggle of accepting that because of the stigmatization of bipolar disorder. But in time, I've come to understand it. And whilst it is always for me, it's an ongoing struggle, because one day I could be feeling great and the next day just like, I just would love to not be like this. But over the years, I've come to understand and kind of see what I can use it to be good at, and how Victoria says about, speaking up and have a very strong sense of justice. That is something that is very dear to me. And that's why I'm here today. This is why I've done so much, for me in the mental health community. And that's what I think, because we need to have those voices. And that's probably also my best thing about working with other neurodivergent people, as Valentina said, when we don't have to mask and we can have a true connection, because we understand that, there's not other people like us and we all have our own experiences. But if we can come together and actually feel connected through our disconnect from other people, it can be a really beautiful thing. So that's why, for me, that's probably my best aspect of it.
Yeah. And for me, I think working with clients who are neurodivergent, it's very exciting to see them growing their self-compassion and level of self-acceptance, because this is such an under-resourced area of support for people. Or I'm excited to see how many people responded yes to knowing about neurodivergence. But in my experience, it's been very, very new for people to understand this about themselves, and having this information allows them to build a more self-compassionate sense of identity and work on building more on their strengths rather than focusing on some of the challenges and difficulties that they often experience.
Thank you so much. There were some absolutely amazing answers. And as you could see me nodding on to a lot of those, I definitely empathized and agreed. So the next question, again, we'll take the same order as last time. What are your biggest challenges, or the biggest challenges that you see the people you work with facing?
Well, there are so many that neurodivergent people face. I work on my self-esteem. I still have quite a low self-esteem, and I often grapple with the imposter syndrome. And if I should choose one biggest challenge is that I tend, like many neurodivergent people with our past traumas, I tend to think that everything is my fault. For example, typical work situations, someone told me, "Oh, Victoria, you didn't send this email." And before even checking if I did send it or not, I started apologizing, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have forgotten it," as usual, because I do forget a lot of things. And even if I did send it, I will still apologize. I will think, well, I did send it, but I'm so sorry. I had to follow up with you to make sure you have received it. So this guilt and this need to apologize all the time, it's challenging. It's quite burden to me personally.
For me, it goes on to build on what Victoria was saying before. We are extremely hard worker because we always need to prove that we are worth it. At the same time, we're constantly on edge because we are afraid of being found out for the majority of the time, let's say, in situations where we can't really be open. And so the biggest struggle that I see is this burning at both ends. We're trying to do a lot more than many others do, going above and beyond as a way of feeling enough, and the constant anxiety that when we go even above and beyond, the smallest slip up will bring the house of cards down. And what is going to happen to me then? Will I be then stigmatized? Will I then be kicked out? And so it's a constant state of exhaustion. And so this is the biggest struggle. I mean, yes, stigmatization, not having access to a lot of opportunity, it's there. And even when we do have access to the opportunity and we are in roles which are fulfilling, it's extremely tough not to burn out, because we are constantly doing a lot more and worried. And the brain space that it takes to pretend to not feel whatever emotion or go against our natural feelings and way of working, it's intense. And so for me, that's one of the biggest struggle is how do you not burn out? I mean, I don't know, I've burned out twice, so I'm not the person to tell you how not to, but that's one of the most common struggle I see.
For me, I would say it kind of echoes what both Victoria and Valentina have said, along of trust and also the anticipation of negative feedback or a negative reception. Because if you slip up from one thing or say one thing, react one way, or even if, for example, for me personally, if my medication on one morning is stronger than usual and I'm in a brain fog and I can't work, like I need to just be so on edge that maybe someone will think something is wrong, and I can't show that because I have to be performing at my best. And it doesn't matter that I have a Seroquel hangover, that is my medication, I still have to work. And it doesn't matter if someone says too bad, everyone else has to deal with things. And so for me, it's very much just keeping pace and just having to try to be on point at all times so that there is no risk of tipping the balance of being good or bad. So it's kind of a balancing act, I would say, for me.
Absolutely. I see that as well in my practice, where the biggest issues are exactly what you're talking about with balance and self-regulation and this. So the biggest things that I see are shame, perfectionism, and this disconnect between the mind and the body. And I think all three of those are related to each other. Perfectionism is usually, overworking in order to avoid shame. And then there becomes this disconnection between actually noticing when your body is tired, because you have to constantly push past that in order to avoid negative feedback or criticism or shame. So this becomes a really difficult cycle to break through for people who've been doing this their entire lives.
I would agree, wholeheartedly, particularly with the not being able to know where you are in terms of burnout. And I'd say to myself often, why am I so tired? Because everyone else seems to be handling this perfectly well. So no, I can really, really relate to a lot of these things. And I see that in the chat as well. So now I'm going to ask us to do a little bit of myth busting. This is actually probably the favorite question we've come up with. So what is your least favorite stereotype about the neurodivergent community? Or what phrase would you never like to hear again?
We can see now with the rise of social media and more public figures or media persons disclosing their neurodivergence, people, they start to self-diagnose, which is great, which can be the first step of receiving proper diagnosis. But then there is another side of the coin. Many people, they tend to say whenever they're overwhelmed or whenever they have hectic week, or I have troubles with concentrating. Really, I think I'm ADHD, or the best one, we're all a bit ADHD. And then people, for me, it's really invalidation, because people, they forget and they don't know yet maybe that ADHD is lifelong condition, and it also is about poor emotional regulation and other things that come with this condition. So it's not only about poor executive functioning or troubles with concentrating. So for me, we all have ADHD is the phrase that really annoys me.
I mean, it goes very similarly into that direction. If there is two that I can, I wish I would never hear anymore. One, personally, that I always hear, and I think it's been said to people with different type of neurodivergency, which is just chill. Why can't you just chill? Just take it easy. I mean, thank you. I would love to. It's not like I want to be stressed, like in this constant state. I don't enjoy it. So if please somebody would just never tell me again, just don't worry about it. That would make my day, my year most likely. And the other thing similar to what Victoria was saying is, oh, I'm so OCD. I need to have my pencil all lined up. My house is so clean. I need to always have, everything. Or you can't be OCD. Your house is a mess. No, that's not how OCD works. Yes, in some cases, you do have those manifestations, and in hundreds of others, you don't. You might love your pencils lined up and not have OCD. It's a very different thing, and it trivializes it. And it's not just the pencils or the room or the cleanliness. It's intrusive thoughts, is fear, is a lot of other things, and it's not fun. It's not a joke. So that's a little bit what I wish we would stop doing. It's using it as a joke.
And I'm going to echo both Victoria and Valentina again. If I can go the rest of my life never having heard a diagnosis used as a describing term for just a mediocre thing, I'll be happy. If I never want to hear the weather is so bipolar. Oh, I'm feeling so bipolar today. No, you're not. Are you? It really irritates me. And I can see that from both Victoria and Valentina with all of our neurodivergency, that it's not just one, it's everything. And it just invalidates people's diagnoses, it invalidates people's experiences, and it just makes it a describing term. And that is the most frustrating thing for me, especially when you have so many, diagnoses that become so popularized in the media, and it becomes it takes away from the term, and it just becomes a describing word. It just really aggravates me. So that's probably my least favorite thing.
And I would say it goes even beyond lay people in the community, but into the medical field, where medical professionals, perhaps the best information they have about neurodivergence comes from movies or other pieces of media. For example, family doctors, I don't think that they are required to study ADHD, for example. So if you bring your son or daughter into the family doctor or pediatrician and ask for a referral for an evaluation, the first question the family doctor will almost always ask is, how are they doing in school? And if you answer, they're doing okay, their grades are fine and they stay in their chair, the doctor will most likely say, okay, well, probably it's not ADHD. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stigmas within the medical field about what a diagnosis looks like. And so if you are in a situation where you suspect it for yourself or for your child, I think self-advocacy is really, really important.
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo that. Yeah, it's the kind of the understanding that is in society versus the lived experience. There's definitely a gap there. And part of the reason for that is simply that for a long time, lived experience was not really prioritized. So thank you so much for sharing those insights. They are extremely important. So I want to change the subject a little bit and talk about neurodivergent strengths. So I can share a little bit of my experience now. So typically neurodivergent people aren't associated with strengths, as we've kind of heard of the stigma and the stereotypes, and also thanks to a traditional medical model, which is pretty deficit based. So I had the experience of doing neuropsychological testing. And this was done to validate my dyslexia diagnosis. And it was only when I did that I learned that I have these like unique strengths that others don't have. So I can think in 3D, for example, and I have pattern recognition that's way above the average. So during that time and learning about these strengths, I learned of this term spiky profile for the very first time. And I was wondering, Elizabeth, if you could tell us a little bit more about what a spiky profile is and what that looks like.
Yeah, so it's like you say with the spikes, so that there are strengths that are picked up by a neuropsychological assessment that help to clarify which parts of the brain and are processing information in certain ways and at certain speeds, different metrics that they're looking at to create this standard sort of typical profile. And oftentimes people who are neurodiverse, their brains are just wired in different ways. So they're going to have more extreme spikes in one direction or another. And it's really helpful for people if they do this kind of assessment to get this feedback, because it really gives you a lot of information about the strengths that are inherent to your brain's wiring so that you can continue to build on those in different settings.
That's great. Thank you. It's a really good explanation. So Valentina, in terms of the workplace, like how can those strengths and challenges show up?
I mean, in my experience, personal and people I've led that felt safe enough to share, you have some of it is what you know, in a way, half stereotype. I know a lot of quite a few people which have ADHD, which are extremely creative or can make connections. For me, creativity is not necessarily just painting and crafts and arts. It's really making connections in between things that you did not think possible, finding different ways to go about things. There is a sensory perception very often with neurodivergent people, especially in ADHD that I know of, where we are much more sensitive to people's mood and the unsaid. Again, not all of it. We know that some are not, but in that case, that kind of mood sensitivity, unsaid word can help a lot to figure out what a problem is coming, to bring things together, to spot the unsaid and really be the glue, as I said, find innovative solution. In my case, the OCD part helps a lot in terms of being able to do risk management and process planning. That is part of why I succeed in a certain career and one of my strengths. And as much as I hate it, sometimes I'm now more accepting it. But sometimes it really drives me nuts having this constant plan B, plan C, plan F. It comes extremely practical at work when you have to do project and risk management. I have them all already done in my head. So there are a lot of ways people can work together and connect their strengths, where even if we have different roles, if we work on the same project, I take care of all those uninspiring admin tasks just because I'm very good at getting them done, and my ADHD colleagues is doing more of the creative. We balance, and I think that's the best when you can get the spiky profile Elizabeth said and get them to match, then you get the best, widest circle. You enlarge it. So, and I shouldn't have said I hate it. I hate my condition, but sometimes it's very frustrating to, as Sarah was saying, I have a love-hate acceptance relationship that changes every day with it.
No, and I think it's totally valid to have different feelings about it. I think a lot of people, see the strengths and love the strengths, and others see the challenges. And I think recognizing both can be really helpful. And, we have strengths, but we should never dismiss the challenges either. So on that note, bringing out strengths, Victoria, how could we bring some of these strengths out in people? How can we encourage that?
That's great that you, Rachel, and you, Elizabeth, you mentioned these specific assessments, that specific tests that can help neurodivergent people to learn to identify their strengths, I came across quite funny, weird tests. What are the best jobs for neurodivergent people or best jobs for ADHD people? And I found it quite weird and quite limitative. I think that, based on my experience, I have ADHD and I'm high potential. That means that I am interested in 1,000 million things. And I don't want to think that I can only succeed in one specific sphere because of my ADHD. And my intrinsic, so my inner motivation is very high. And when it is high, I can learn things very, very fast. And it's also the role of a manager. And here is the difference between good manager and bad manager, not only for neurodivergent people, but for any kind of employees, to see best in people and to help them thrive, to make that connection that Valentina mentioned between different profiles, to combine strengths and maybe spheres where people struggle, to put them together and to make perfect conditions where this can work. So where people can learn new skills that they're lacking in safe environment, and just to empower those individuals and help them strive.
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I think made some really good points. So as we talk about strengths, I also again want to touch a little bit on challenges just to keep things, how can I say, as reality. So when I realized it was that I had these strengths, it was quite a hard realization, I would say, because as I grew up, I was not diagnosed for quite a long time. So I didn't know. And I found that I had like a lot of criticism, and I really focused on that rather than what I was good at. So I've heard it said many times that neurodivergent people hear much more criticism growing up already by the time they're sort of 12 or 13 than their peers. So if we feel comfortable, I'd like to invite the panel to talk a little bit about what that was like, and maybe talk about an example. And again, we'll go in the order of my screen. So Victoria, I will pass to you. Then we'll go Valentina, Sarah, and Elizabeth. Again, Elizabeth, in the context of your of the people that you work with.
Rachel, I'm so sorry. What was the question?
So sorry, like some of the criticism that you faced, and how that made you feel. Maybe
Sure.
An example, if you're happy to provide that.
Well, that was classical example of my ADHD. Just my mind slipped away. So thank you for.
You're welcome.
You're
welcome.
The question.
More than happy.
So the example of criticism, at my late workplace, I received quite ambiguous feedback from my colleague that I have a very strong personality, and I just couldn't. And I tried to ask him, what does it mean? The person couldn't tell me. Maybe somehow it is linked to my drive for justice, but this feedback, which is what can I do with this? I mean, how can I improve myself? How it is related to my actual work? Is it about my personality, or is it about my work itself? So this kind of feedback for people, for anyone actually, is bad and not constructive at all. So this kind of criticism, and also that I have troubles with prioritizing. It is true, I have troubles with prioritizing, but just mentioning that, I know it already, but receiving feedback, but don't receiving from your manager, for example, steps to work on it or to come up with strategies how to make it better for future or for my particular role, then I think this is useless. So there were two late examples of criticism.
I mean, when I was growing up, the most common ones were, you're too much. You're so self-centered. Why can't you be flexible? Why does it have to be about you? It doesn't have to be about me. I wish it wasn't about me. The type of OCD I have, it's very much linked with responsibilities and doing the right thing. So I've also heard things about just give up on the principles. Don't be a goody two shoes all the time. So it was, don't be a drama queen. It's when you're anxious, you're a drama queen. When you don't want to break the rules because your mind goes in overdrive about what is the right thing to do, it's be a goody two shoes. And when you can't make a decision because your mind is still in overdrive, overthinking what is the right thing to do, is don't be so undecisive. And so at times I've been called self-centered, bossy, unflexible, but undecisive, and a drama queen and a goody two shoes. And so I mean, sometimes it's really hard when you grow up from a child to a teen to a young adult to figure out, how can I be all of these things that sometimes are in conflict? I mean, can I never get it right? So that's one of the most typical ones that I've heard. And in the workplace, what Victoria was saying, it's a lot of irrelevant, or let's say not actionable and specific feedback. Just don't be so sensitive. Oh God. Again, am I self-centered and egoistic, or too sensitive? I don't get it. So that's a little bit the confusing part with all the type of criticism that I personally got growing up.
Yeah. So for me, it was basically, when you're too much, you're too much. But then if you're not, you're not. You're fun if you want to do all these things and you're in a great mood and you're the best person ever because you're so much fun. Oh my God, yes to everything. But then the moment that it's down, why don't you leave your bed? Why are you just so reaction? Why are you crying all the time? Why are you so emotional? Like, it's the balancing of not understanding. And growing up, obviously, I didn't know I was bipolar. I thought I was depressed from a very young age. And that would just be put down to only child syndrome. You're attention seeking. You're just, why you just want attention. It's because everything else. But then when you get older, then it's just a teenager. Teenagers are emotional. She's in an all-girls private school. That's because they're just bitching all the time. That's girls. Girls do that. But then when it becomes to getting an adult and you get a diagnosis of bipolar, then it's like, oh, that's why. Because you're a problem. You're too much. And I've seen that even in the workplace. If we go back to masking, if I'm trying to hold myself back because I don't know how to react to people, why don't you talk enough? Why weren't you listening? But then if there's something I'm passionate about, like what Valentina said, you're being bossy, like, being then put back into your place. Like, remember, you're a woman, you're a young woman in this place. Like, don't remember your place. So for me, it's just always this criticism of the balancing act. And it's never because of being neurodivergent yourself. It's because of how people see it. And it's never just, that's how you are. It's, I don't like you because of how you're like that. You need to change. So I could go on for hours, and I'm sure most of our panelists, we all could as well. So yeah, open-ended question.
You're so right, Sarah. It's such a projection often from how the person is perceiving your neurodivergence. But I think it's great that we're talking about like overt or verbalized feedback, but I think there's also this kind of nonverbal feedback that often happens, particularly in workplace or school settings, where there's exclusion, or people are iced out, or people are ignored, or sort of there's this especially among, I think, girls, there's a bullying that is less visible. And that can be incredibly painful for people. And so I think, in a workplace, it's important to recognize that everybody usually has something to say. And if somebody's kind of consistently not saying something, there might be a need to check in on that person and make sure that they feel safe in that environment, because there might be dynamics going on that you're not able to recognize or observe.
I definitely agree with all of that. And yeah, just sort of, I think sometimes it's it's a societal norm that we comment on certain things that aren't seen as the norm. And, if we've done this in the past, I think it's a reflection of society. And I saw someone in the chat who said, like, sort of she'd, called her daughter difficult. And I would say, like, self-compassion here is also important, right? Because you cannot change the past. You can only change the future with the knowledge that you have. So I also wanted to add that point in. So yeah, when it comes to the workplace, I think having experienced all of this criticism in the past, it can sometimes make it a little bit difficult, particularly around the issue of feedback. So on the one hand, feedback is so important to help us learn and to grow and improve. But sometimes the traditional feedback process can be quite unbearable for some individuals. So, Victoria, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your experience with 360-degree feedback. So what are the reasons you feel that perhaps this is not the best approach for people who are neurodivergent?
Well, yes, I will speak about my own experience, and I hope that other people, they had better one with this 360-degree feedback. For me, these standardized methods, they are more about company policy rather than personal growth, helping employees become better, receiving constructive feedback. And many of neurodivergent people, we have rejection sensitive dysphoria. We are very sensitive to criticism, and we tend to think we have difficulties differentiating criticism, like objective criticism about our concrete situation and about our personality. We tend to think we are bad, we're not enough, we don't worth anything, etc., etc. So for me, 1 week before this assessment, this test, I was freezed. I started to feel so stressed and overwhelmed that I couldn't actually work. And during this week, I wanted to kind of prepare myself. So I wanted to ask my manager, like, tell me something, give me feedback. I asked, like, what did I do here? What did I do wrong? And he was like, Victoria, actually, I don't want to talk to you about this. You will receive your 360-degree feedback. You will see it all. And when you say this kind of thing to neurodivergent person who already, I was ready to read all this negative feedback. I was absolutely sure that I will only receive negative feedback because I tend to overthink whenever people, they didn't notice anything. I was, everyone know that I'm a fraud. Everyone know that I'm so bad. I'm bad in my job. I have this imposter syndrome, even if it is objectively, it's not true. So I am against this type of assessment. I'm sure that especially in small companies, we don't speak about corporations, in small companies, there are different ways. And especially when the company called themselves a family, having close relationship between the manager and colleagues, making this type of test is destructive for group dynamics, for neurodivergent people themselves. And I spoke to my neurotypical colleagues, and they had the same issues. They were super stressed, and they concentrated only on negative feedback and ignored completely positive side, because it's human psychology. We tend to focus on negative side sometimes.
Yeah, I would echo that. It can be quite a terrifying experience, but particularly when you have this sort of anticipation that you're going to hear this bad feedback. And RSD, for anyone who is not familiar with the term, it's basically a very, very strong reaction to feedback. So it's the dysphoria word. Dysphoria is a Greek word for unbearable. So that's basically kind of what the term means. So now that we kind of have a good understanding of some of the issues around these sort of delayed and anonymous and big feedback sessions and why perhaps they're not the best way to give feedback to neurodivergent people or even neurotypicals. Valentina, I'd like to ask, what could we do instead that might still facilitate that need for feedback, but do it in a way that's much more bearable and helpful for people?
A couple of things. First, the process of what I've learned a few years back it's called feed forward rather than feedback. Giving feedback of things that happened, it's, to be honest, useless unless there is an objective or something you want to improve in the future. So why not focus about what is it that you want to change, or what is it that the person needs to develop, and have a discussion openly with feed forward. How do you think you want to go there? It doesn't matter what we've done in the past. And feed forward starts from the employee, and we can give more resources as well for the people. So changing from feedback, I mean, great to know that I was maybe too sensitive or too bossy on a meeting 6 months ago. So what? I'm just going to overthink it to death, and that's it. And to feed forward is first one of the things I personally like the most. The other thing is really the logistics of it. If you have that relationship with your employees, talk about it. Where, when, and how do they want to have this discussion? Because it doesn't matter if it's feedback or feed forward. If you have a RSD, if you are a very sensitive person, you're still going to perceive something because you would, that's how our mind sometimes works. And so I had discussions about, is it online better? Do you want to be in person? Do you want to be outside where we don't have to look at each other and you don't have to pretend to have eye contact with me while trying not to cry? Do you want to have it on a Friday? Do you need a day off after? Whatever it is. And second, and sorry, third point, and I'll cut it short, then it's really filter. Your company might be requiring you to go through the process of peer feedback, high-level people, 360, whatever. Filter it. Is it relevant? Is it important? Is it a deal breaker for what this person wants to do? Is it something that is not going to have an impact and is a minor thing? Then ask yourself, do I actually have to share it? And if you have to share it, make sure that you qualify it. It would be really, it's a nice thing to do. It's a small thing. If you don't do it, it doesn't matter. Not all feedback is created equal. And as managers, it's our job, if we can't change the system, to filter the system.
This is really excellent advice. So with that said, we talked a little bit about some of the neurodivergent experience, some of the strengths and the challenges, but I wanted to talk a little bit about our experiences living and working in Switzerland, because I think it is a little bit of a unique experience. So Sarah, I would like to get your perspective on this first, because you are Swiss. So what is your experience of mental health and neurodivergence more generally? Yeah, that was my question.
No, so yeah, it's an interesting topic. So I am Swiss, but I'm half Irish. And I lived in Australia and also the UK for a certain amount of years. So my family in Switzerland, we come from a very traditional small village in the middle of nowhere in eastern Switzerland, where you don't talk about things. And when I was going through the early stages of what would become bipolar disorder, it became a real issue for my family, that it would just like, you don't talk about this. This is your problem. You don't bring it to the table because you're creating problems. What I would later then find out is that most of my family themselves had mental health issues or neurodivergent themselves, and there was just generations that you don't talk about it. In the last kind of 5 years, I can say, I think as a culture, we are getting there. It is different to when I was growing up, that we can talk about it. Like my grandma can say that, like, she had, to drop just a random story, she talked about it the other weekend, like about mental health. And that's something that would never come out of her mouth when I was a teenager. But at the same time, in my opinion, we are behind. For example, and I think it's a different kind of, both culturally and also systemically. For example, in Australia, and you can get free visits to a psychologist, up to 10 per year if you go to your GP, and get a mental health plan because they have public health systems. So that is free. Here we have this Krankenkasse, we have our own insurance model that is it can be limiting for people. And in my own personal experience, I just don't think we have those facilities and access to so many things that we can get in other countries. Obviously, no one is perfect. Australia is not perfect. They have their own problems, but I think culturally we've come some way, but also systemically and in terms of access wise, we are so behind. And that is really what led me to start the campaign that I did when I worked at the British Embassy, is that I saw that there was no resources on how to access mental health services in Switzerland in English, besides maybe an article on swissinfo.ch. Didn't really exist. And so we were seeing in our cross embassies that there was just a rising number of mental health cases of people not knowing how to access, and are actually in a crisis, and they don't know how to access it here. So then that is why I was so passionate about creating this project, where we created information, we created services of how to actually access information. And that can go from just knowing how to find an English-speaking psychologist if you don't know a national language. And it is so frustrating as well, because as we all know, we're speaking here in English. English is the 5th unofficial language of Switzerland. And the fact that we do not have those resources is extremely frustrating. But at the same time, I can say that we have come a long way. Thinking about little teenage me, not even just a child me, that, if I was acting up, I would just be locked, just go away, like, don't bring it out on the table. That's your private issues. And I think we've come some way, but there's still a long way to go.
Definitely would agree that, yeah, we have work to do. As we say, every country has its own problems. But yes, Elizabeth, from a clinical perspective, how would you describe the situation in Switzerland?
Well, we have come a long way. Even in the 10 years that I've been working here in Switzerland, there's been a huge increase in the amount of English-speaking mental health practitioners that you're able to find these days. So that's really good. But I think there is this language issue, right? So like we were talking about earlier with the spiky profile and accessing, for example, a neuropsychological evaluation, that needs to be in as close to your mother tongue language as possible. And testing equipment is very expensive. And very often people don't have that, like practitioners like me don't have access to that themselves. They have it through an institution. And here they don't have English-based testing materials very often. So it's very difficult to find it in a language that works for you if you don't speak one of the national languages. But it's also very expensive. And I think that's something that people aren't necessarily prepared for, especially if they're moving here from an Anglophone country of some kind. So it's something that I encourage people to think about as they're moving here, or, if they're even thinking about moving here and they have a pre-existing mental health issue, or they know that they're neurodivergent, is to already start looking and researching. And hopefully, Sarah, we can get your information out there as broadly as possible. But yeah, it's a really big issue. I find that culturally here, we lag behind the US at least, 20 years. I know that there is a pretty open conversation happening in the US in corporations, especially around the topic of neurodiversity, and having these kind of conversations and helping people recognize biases in the same way that we're addressing racism and other issues in intersectionality. So I hope it's something that this panel is also helping to kick off in these small ways, but definitely, yes, a long way to go.
Definitely have a fun story about finding a practitioner who can do neuropsychological testing, because I was told you need a native. I was like, oh, okay, I'll find one in Geneva. I did not find one in Geneva. I ended up going to Canton Vaud and almost crossing into Canton Valais, and taking a train and then taking a post bus up a mountain in order to access this. So it's definitely a challenge. So Valentina, like what is your experience?
I got here as a young adult, very different environment compared to where I grew up, and I got pretty fluent in, I speak one of the national languages, did not help me in Geneva, but my French became very good. My experience is it's twofold. I see a lot of improvement when it comes to the way we look at and think about neurodivergency in children, especially these days. I've seen my daughter as an example, and I have seen the way the school is supporting, diagnoses were available, testing all the languages, which in other countries, like I'm from Italy, forget about it. I know it's not like Anglo-Saxon. I still see a lot more, though, to do when it comes to young women or young parents, and especially women, or as well men in the workplace. For women and men, the workplace, I would say stigma is huge. If you don't fit a certain profile of what is considered leadership, which is different in Swiss companies versus American or English company, nevertheless, it's very standardized and codified. It is a different one, but they're both very codified. And if you don't fit as a man or a woman, you're going to have a really, really hard time. As a woman, and here I speak just from experience, it's though extremely difficult to get a diagnosis. The reason why I had 2 burnouts is one, because I wasn't diagnosed until the second one. Therefore, I didn't have the tool to avoid the second one. And I wasn't diagnosed because the answer was almost always, you work too much, just take a holiday. And then it became, you need to go work 80%. Well, of course, you have a young child. What do you expect? I almost was not taken seriously until I was working less than my 100%. And still, all of the symptoms and the issues I was having did not go away. And then even by speaking the local languages, I speak German now. And so all my therapy, my therapist, my GP, everything, it's even beyond the language issue. It was really a can you take this seriously issue. It's not just because I should not work 100%. So there is a lot of stigma with, you're just trying to do too much. As a young woman, and when you become a parent, even more. So that I think it's an extra layer that to be fair, I don't know if the men are encountering, so I can't say, but I think that's been a huge struggle in accessing the right type of care. Then comes the stigma of the workplace and the fact that burnout is still considered something to be ashamed of from an employee point of view, not from an employer point of view. I mean, in other countries, we are at the point where if an employer has a history of having many people burning out, it's their reputation on the line. Here, it becomes your personal failure. So you see, we've got a long way to go. In Switzerland, we're not there yet. That's why I'm talking about it.
Thank you so much. And Victoria, do you have anything to add?
I actually, right now, I just realized that I was kind of privileged to receive my diagnosis very fast. And for me, the process was pretty straightforward. I'm originally from Russia. And in my country, ADHD is seen as traditionally as a hyperactive boy condition. We don't even consider it as a condition that adults might have. Here in Switzerland, so my diagnosis was fast. Also, like, I have the same experience as Valentina. It was my burnout who led me to ask for help and to receive my diagnosis. But then I just realized that I was prescribed medication very, very fast, like straight away. I got prescription for ADHD medication, and then the help and support stopped. So it was, since then, it's kind of my own battle, and I had to change psychiatrist because I was not happy with only receiving prescriptions. I wanted to have kind of coaching and psychological support, and I had to do it on my own. So from my own experience, it was easy to get prescription, but nothing else. And also I didn't even think about like struggle that my colleague here, other panelists had with the sources in English, because I speak French. So for me, it was quite easy. But I can say that even in French, there is a lack of resources. So yeah, definitely there is a way to go. And altogether we should change the narrative. And also among psychiatrist community, they have different views, and I raised the topic of neurodiversity with both two psychiatrists, and they were kind of surprised to know that this term exists. Like, okay, because for them there were like separate diagnoses, like there is ADHD, there is autism, there is OCD and other stuff, but they didn't even consider that there is the changing narrative about neurodiversity, there is still a lot of stigma, and even from psychiatrists who encourage you not to disclose. I experienced it myself. So yeah, there is definitely a way to go.
Okay, I thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences. It's really, really important, and that we kind of hear how different people experience things. And on that note, we have a member of the audience who really wanted to take part in the panel. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late after I'd done all the flyer and all the comms, but I met him and we spoke a little bit about his experience, and his experience is a little bit different to ours. So Severin, if you are here, love you to unmute and just tell us quickly a little bit about your experience. And you said to me actually that you'd had quite a positive time of things. So I'd love to know sort of how that was and what the reason for that being more positive was.
Yes, hello everyone. Overall, I can say in my life I've been ridiculously lucky in almost every way. And part of that is how my autism in the workplace, I've had almost exclusively positive experiences so far. I don't have that much experience yet, but still, in my first workplace, I was at Auticon, a consultancy that only employs autists as consultants. They're obviously, it's meant for autists. Everything is visible. They have job coaches whose only purpose is to get autists working in the way they want or in the way they work best. And at the placements, everyone involved knows about how that specific person works, what they need to be productive. And oftentimes they even appreciated the requirement for clear communication and said it actually helps their own team as well. And now the second workplace where I'm super lucky is a very research-heavy academic company where I managed to get a master's in computer science, and I'm often the least educated person at the lunch table. So those people really know how to do logical discussion, technical debates, and those happen asynchronously in many cases. So even if my social skills aren't quite up to par, I can still participate without much impairment. Then another thing that's really convenient is they're only focused on output. Like, if you work best in the bathtub, no one cares. You just do whatever works best for you. And yeah, it's super technical. So many people, I guess like 20%, would have a decent chance at some kind of diagnosis just from my impression alone. People are from different countries. So even if you are weird or nerdy or whatever people can say about you, you don't even stand out that much.
Honestly, sounds pretty awesome. Yeah, to have like supportive environment and to have that support. And yeah, I just wanted to I really appreciate you coming and speaking with us and adding to the story, because yeah, it's important. As I said at the beginning, our experiences are often quite different. So thank you so much, Severin. We really, really appreciate that. You came and spoke to us and shared a little bit of your story with us. So we are 1.5 hours into our session, and one of the things I wanted to really talk about actually was discussing this in the workplace, right? I think even after gaining an understanding of yourself and getting diagnosed and understanding your strengths and your need, it can sometimes be difficult to explain everything to people around you, like even if you're very kind of at peace with it yourself. So in terms of disclosure, and Victoria's already hinted a little bit of this, but I'm going to ask Sarah my first question. Is it better to disclose or not in the workplace, in your opinion?
I don't have a straight answer to that, because I have had situations where I've disclosed and I have had situations where I haven't. In those ones that I have, I've had ones that have been so supportive, and I will never be thankful enough for how appreciative I was for that. But on the other side, I've had terrible experiences that have been honestly traumatic. So as we talk about everyone's neurodivergency being different, I think then that's how for me personally, that's how I approach the situation. I'm not going to, the first time I meet someone, for me personally, I'm not going to be like, hey, my name's Sarah, I'm bipolar, how are you? I'm not going to do that. How I go about is, I go about trust. I build a relationship. It doesn't even have to be directly with a manager, because then you're talking about hierarchical structures, and that can just be sometimes a bit like, I don't know. So for me, I go about just building a relationship. It can be with my coworker, but it can also be with my manager. But then if there is maybe a circumstance that arises where I feel the need that I need to say something, for example, if I need to be somewhere at 7 a.m, I know that my Seroquel is still going to be in effect, and I'm going to be mute. I'm not going to be able to talk until at least another hour. I've had to disclose then and just say, hey, I struggle personally with the idea that mental health, physical health should be treated equally in every aspect of life, but I'm also very aware that it's not. And I just choose when it needs to be. And in a perfect world, it wouldn't need to be. But from my experiences, just even with the stigmatization of bipolar disorder, I very much just have to know my surroundings. And at least one of my kind of superpowers is that I feel like I can very much read a room. I can read person, I can read body language, and I can see and I can assess if they're going to take it well or if they're not going to take it well. I've been wrong once, and I hope to God I am never going to be wrong again. And yeah, it's a very, I think it's just a very open-ended discussion, and I probably could talk about it, and most of our panelists could probably talk about it for another hour and a half.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all question, even though probably if in an ideal world it would be. So Victoria, going back to what you mentioned about not being tired to disclose, could you tell us a little bit about that and sort of how that impacted you?
Yeah, so when I received my diagnosis, my first question, so it was, I felt huge relief because I finally, like, all pieces of the puzzle, they came together and everything was clear for me. And I asked logical question like, okay, well, I don't want to have burnout again. So should I tell my manager that I have ADHD? And the answer from my psychiatrist was like, he answered very fast, like, no, of course not. I said, well, okay, why? And he replied that there is a huge stigma in Switzerland, so please don't do it. And I thought maybe it's also because they don't want people, they want people to stay at work and not to be kind of marginalized. I don't know. But for me, it was, yeah, so I didn't disclose. And still, I don't have experience disclosing. So I have experience of post disclosing. When I left my workplace, then I disclosed. But that's why I chose the path of self-advocating, because for me, maybe with age, maybe with my experience, and also like self-love, I don't know, masking doesn't work for me. I know that it wouldn't work anymore because I cannot perform well. I spend so much energy trying to fit into, to hide all my weirdness and to try to catch up. And I would work much better if I would be transparent. And that's why my strategy is different now. I'm considering the path of entrepreneurial path, and I saw the comment that, yeah, a huge number of Silicon Valley founders, they are neurodivergent. I can relate. And many people, many neurodivergent people, they chose the path of self-employment, and I can understand why. Because here in Switzerland, it's still difficult, especially when you don't have this visible condition or visible disability. It's still difficult to ask for accommodation because there is no clear way to ask for any type of accommodation, no policy. So it's your own battle. And first you need to educate your employer. So it is kind of hard. So my strategy is to look for a company that they have, first, they don't have toxic culture, even for neurotypical employees. And also, I'm exploring entrepreneurial paths. We will see if it works or not. So yeah, but definitely for me, I chose the path of disclosing because it doesn't work in any other way. But it's my own experience. Again, I agree with you, Sarah. It should be the personal choice, because it can be traumatizing experience. It can be even, it's so difficult, and it's so different for different people. We're not the same. All of us are different traumas and experience.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And Valentina, we obviously mentioned in when I introduced you that you're very open about anything and everything. So what are your reasons for that decision, and how have you seen things change as a result of adopting that mindset?
So the reason for that, I think, let's put it this way. I've been discriminated a lot. Okay. I've been discriminated a lot, even without disclosing. When your masking starts to sleep, or you are post-burnout, you get discriminated. And so until the moment I actually started openly talking about this, I've been an advocate for a lot of other diversity and inclusion groups, but this I have not talked about until last year. And then and again, I can't tell people you should disclose or you should not. It's about your situation and I have it was a bit of a necessity and a privilege. Okay, it was the necessity where I said I cannot be 100% entrepreneur because with my OCD, I basically am unable to ever disconnect from work if I am a full-time entrepreneur, and that's not healthy for me. I need to go back to corporate. And if I'm going back to corporate, I have this kind of privilege where I have a lot of experience. I have my results speaking for me. I'll talk about it. Worst that can happen, it'll take me a little bit more to filter companies which are not accepting. And the fact that I speak about it will remove, and I published a book where I talk about it, and all of that will remove the need for me to disclose because, and I can guarantee you people read your LinkedIn and I've got questions that you would not imagine. In interviews, I've been kicked out. I've been clearly told that I don't fit the culture, but also at the very last stage, I've had somebody going like, you talk about neurodivergency. Are you autistic? Can you even do the job? And sorry, either way, if I was, I'm not, but if I was, that's nothing to do with the job, and it's not a negative thing. But I've had every type of rejection. I was scared. Career suicide is something that came to my mind, and a lot of people told me, you are doing career suicide. I saw it as a self-filtering. I'm doing maybe career suicide. Maybe I'm doing career self-selection, where all of the people which are gonna disqualify me because I talk about it are places where I would burn out again. And it took 200 plus in between coffee meetings, networking, talking to people, and applications to find a place where I am accepted. I did not need to even to disclose because it's out there and people just adapt and ask you those questions about what would work for you. I don't need to tell you why some things would not work for me. If you just ask me what would work for me, right? I don't need to focus on the negative. And that was my decision. But I have the privilege of 20 years of results behind in terms of saying that, and a certain amount of savings and whatnot. And not everybody does have that. So it's your choice. There is a stigma. I can't say no. There is a stigma in Switzerland when you disclose. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places there is.
Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, as we are 1 minute before we're going to start questions, I'm going to jump to the last question, and we may cover the topic of accommodations in the Q&As, so we'll be able to still cover this topic. But to everyone on the panel, as quickly as you're able, if you have like one wish for the future of something that would change in the regards to neurodiversity, how it's received, how it's accommodated, what would it be? And I'll go in the backwards order now. So I'll ask Elizabeth, then Sarah, then Valentina, then Victoria.
Compassion and curiosity, both for yourself as a neurodiverse person, but also in having conversations with other people who identify.
For me, it would be just like that neurodivergency and mental health is actually taken seriously as physical health. So we stop with the facade that companies can produce and say nowhere, and to stop virtue signaling.
I'm going further in the future, and I just wish it's a non-issue. We talk about neurodiversity as the concept, which means if neurodiversity is an equal pie and everybody has the same share, there is no typical anymore. We all have the same share of that diversity. If we reach that equal division of the pie, I'll be happy, because then there is no need for accommodation. It's individualization or whatever. The moment we reach that, then I'm happy, because there's no more neurotypical versus divergent. It's just one of the many.
And Victoria.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everyone. When we accept, when we're curious to know what it is to be neurodivergent, when companies, they don't pretend to, because we speak here in Switzerland, we speak a lot about inclusion, about diversity, about sustainability, but sometimes it's just, as Sarah said, it's just a facade. So it's the company, they capitalize on it, but without real actions, without real communication. And the first things to do is just simply to ask and listen, and then to react, and to everyone to be just a human being that treat the other one with respect. And I wish people, they listen more and they stay curious, because we have a lot of stories to tell. Just ask us and we will be happy to speak about ourselves and to help you understand what it is.
Thank you so much. This has been probably one of the most insightful discussions that I've had the pleasure of moderating. I'm really just grateful to all of you for your vulnerability, for your just how well you've articulated your experience and the bravery in bringing some of these issues to light. It's incredible. So we have the questions. So the first one that I have here is just to Sarah, that can we provide those mental health resources, the English ones, into the chat and with people. I just flag that now, and we'll go to it.
Find it, but it can be done.
We maybe, in fact, what we'll do is we'll follow up with, we're going to make a blog with some Q&As and things, so we can put those in that blog, and we can share them via the website, and we'll make sure that we share that with all the people who've signed up to the event. So then we have a question from Jenny Knaus. So she asks about how to manage the public expectations of performance socially and professionally, so with work and friends, without having to disclose as being neurodivergent because of that stigma and repercussions. Who would like to take this one?
Even without disclosing, just stop caring as much as you can about the expectation of, at least from when it comes to private life, friends and family. Mm-hmm. You don't need to justify your needs. You don't have to say why you're worried or why you're tired or whatever it is. It is what it is. Some things you just do in a certain way, and maybe they don't like it, maybe they don't accept it, they do. You don't owe them any justification. So if you manage to do that, it's already one less stress. At work, it's the same. Go gradually if you can. Just maybe introduce one by one, slowly, some of the changes. And if they know you enough for what you bring, well, you know what? Now I finally letting you know that from now on, I prefer to work from 10 to 10. That's when I do my best work. For many years, I've just used the words, that's how I do my best work. I didn't have to say how or why, but that's what I've used.
Completely,
that's a tip that I can share.
Completely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's you can still identify the challenges that you have and think, okay, how could I be helped with that? And maybe it's like being allowed flexi time, so arriving between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. on a given day, and then leaving between, within a 2-hour window at the end. That can be a really important thing that actually helps everyone. And then, maybe if it's like dyslexia, using a screen reader like Speechify and just saying, I find it easier when I can listen to it. It's more, again, how I do my best work, how I prefer to work. You don't have to say necessarily that you are neurodivergent. I think that can be super helpful. So really great question from Claire Cook. So she says, how can you share some examples of impactful impactful allyship tips?
I could maybe give some, like, for me, so in a previous workplace, it was given to every employee that we could all undertake a course to be a mental health first aider. And like everyone does, for actual first aid, everyone could do it. The whole entire workplace could go for 2 days and learn to be and become a qualified mental health first aider. I think that when you want to be an ally, you do though. And it's that there's also, trying not to be provocative with my language, but basically I think just listen and learn. And if you are actively seeking out how you can support those people in your network, you're already doing the best thing, because other people can just stop at the door and say, oh no, that person has that, and they believe that. They don't want to listen. They don't want to learn. So for me, a really great example also was when I did disclose, and a manager said, okay, then what steps can we put in place? How can I help you? What could I look out for? If you're not going to tell me because there's something you don't want to, what can I look out for? What are the steps? Can we have a plan in place if something does happen? And truly, just as you would if there was a physical issue in a workplace, like for example, if there was that you would put the steps in place. You do that for people with neurodivergency. You let them say what works best and what doesn't. And just be open-minded and don't put people in a box because they have a term that you heard so medialized. So I don't think that's a word, but I just made it up anyway. So that's some insight from me.
Completely and utterly agree with that. Yeah, it's about just asking them, okay, what can I do for you? I mean, you can also look up if they have a particular thing that they struggle with, like what might help them. And maybe you even, I remember an example of someone who just said, oh, like when they experience anxiety, what helps them, but don't force things on people is the other thing I want to say is like, yeah, you can suggest, but don't force. So like some people like meditation and other people hate it. So you can say, oh, I find it really helpful. And then they might want to explore it, or they might find it doesn't work for them.
Very quickly, 2 things. One, if people are coming to you as an ally, don't invalidate it. Oh, no, you don't. Or you're just making too big of a deal. It was just a small, it's a big deal to me. Maybe it's not for other people, but it is. So try not invalidating language, even if you don't mean it that way. You mean it reassuring. It's horrible to hear. And then very quickly on what Rachel said before, those suggestions, flex time, screen readers, dimming lights, whatever it is, most people which actually are neurodivergent and need them are scared to actually ask for them, because it's what if they figure it out? Now, if you happen to be neurotypical or you have a different type of neurodivergency and you're not worried about screen readers, ask for it. Be the ally person. It doesn't impact me if I ask. So you might be doing a favor to other people, and you don't have the anxiety of asking. So that's a tip, I would say.
Really, really good tip. So this is about sort of dealing with sensitivities. So Melinda writes like, what are the tips and the tricks that you can use to manage sensitivities? So I can answer a little bit on this one. So, I mean, there are a few types of sensitivities. So one part can be like sensory. So, light, sound, feeling of clothes on the skin or touch, texture. It can be things like movement or kind of vertigo-like. It can even be things like proprioception. So where your body is in space. There are many different types of sensory sensitivities and preferences. So on that front, learning sort of what those are. You can do questionnaires with an occupational therapist, or even on your own, just learning like what your sensory preferences are and looking at how to accommodate them. So like, for example, if I'm in Manor on a Saturday, I definitely always take like noise cancelling headphones with me because it's unbearable otherwise. But yeah, that can be one side of it. And then there's the emotional side of sensitivity, which yeah, I mean, that's definitely a challenge for a lot of people. And I invite, again, others to give their advice on both of these.
On the emotional side, I think knowing what your triggers are and what your recovery things are, it's the first step. Knowing what makes you feel better after you get triggered. I mean, I'm very sensitive to negative comments and negative feedback. It can be minor, and I might have a panic attack or cry right after. And until I learned what gets me out of that state, back to okay, I can move on, that would last for hours or days. So knowing what makes you get over it in a way, or get past the hump, not over it, but like, that helps you along. That's the first thing. And two, in a workplace, again, you don't need to disclose, but if it's something that it's extremely hard for you to control, it's worse. Try not to cry and then beat yourself up because it's a failure that you cried at work and now your career will be forever destroyed. What goes through my mind for many years, and just own up to it and say, folks or boss, heads up, when I get angry or when I am disappointed at myself, I cry. It's nothing to do with being emotional. I just cry in anger or in disappointment. I cry when I burn the pasta, being Italian. I make a joke out of it and then I cry. I stopped trying not to, but I didn't say that it's because I'm sensitive to the criticism. I just said that's how I react. Deal with it.
And I think what Valentina is saying requires a lot of self-acceptance. And so that is a journey in itself as well. So I think really making that a priority, if you find this out about yourself, to really take the time to process it, either with a mental health professional or somebody else who understands and who can give you this space to explore and contextualize the diagnosis. And then that'll make you a better self-advocate and an advocate with other people. So, you'll be able to recognize what sort of things are grounding for you when you get triggered. Because early on, sometimes people don't even know that they are triggered and they show up at the office and they've been dissociated for the past 24 hours. And so it can help to have a regular practice during the day of just checking in with yourself, whether it's like when you go and push the coffee machine in the morning on, or, turn off your computer, like just set in little moments of time in the day where you just check in and you like feel your body and make sure that you're still kind of connected to the present moment. And that might be a way for you to gauge over time, like, how overwhelmed am I? How checked out am I? How hyper-focused am I? Like, how much am I actually present right now to feel myself? And that can also help, interfere or prevent burnout symptoms from escalating. So a regular practice, like even for neurotypical people, just having that space to check in with yourself routinely throughout the day, not waiting until you remember it, is a good place to start.
Excellent advice there. So we have time for one more question, I think. So this comes from Jenny, and it's, how do you best support neurodivergent applicants during a job application and hiring processes? And then, do you see advantages in the new work model? I must admit, I'm not familiar with the new work model, but maybe others are.
I'll just say, as someone who's going through the process of now looking for a new job, it is exhausting. And I think that is for everyone. I can't give the HR side of it, but it is exhausting. And basically for me, myself, I feel like every single interview that I do, I am masking. And then afterwards, I don't want to talk to anyone. And, for me, I can't give any insights on the HR side, but I think that there probably should be more ways that we could maybe make the interviewing process easier, even just applying for jobs. Like if you're just having to do the same repetitive thing over and over again, it discourages me from wanting to apply for a job if I have to write so much and I have to keep saying the whole thing and I have to keep going through it because it is exhausting and I'm reliving things and I'm reliving experiences that were not good. And you just have to keep putting yourself out there. And I don't think the job application process is easy for anyone. Maybe, I don't know what the new job model is, but maybe it is like in this post-COVID environment. I know that for me personally, I was nearing a burnout and then we went into lockdown and it was the best thing ever for me because I didn't have to leave. I could just be myself in my home and I was just happy. And having to adapt into a hybrid model was a thing, but I think, maybe that is, but that's just me brainstorming.
I mean, from the job application process, stop throwing out CVs that have one or two typos in it. I mean, I have to say that, like, it's it's not a reflection that someone's not capable because they make a typo. It's like, unless that job is a copywriting job or a proofreading job, there is no need for, an odd spelling mistake to be the reason you throw that CV in the bin and, disqualify that candidate. And also the ATS system, like, look outside and see who's been rejected, because you might find amazing experience that's just not following that linear path. In that rejection pile. I mean, you probably find all the neurodivergent candidates in the rejection pile because it's like, it can be sometimes that we have like different careers or we do a few different things. So yeah, that would be my answer. So to everyone that's attended this evening, to our panelists, thank you very, very much for everything that you've contributed, to our moderators, to everyone at Women in Digital Switzerland. Thank you very much. And I wish you a good and restful evening. Goodbye.